Welcome, everybody, to today's webinar on translating success, the role of book scouts in children's publishing. Today's webinar is going to be led by our Rights Committee Chair, Kris Kliemann. Kris, thank you for putting this session together today, and I'm going to turn it over to you.
Great. We do have a couple of slides here at the beginning that we can go through just to orient everyone to what's going on at BISG and the BISG Rights Committee. Brian, if you want to take any of this, I can run through it too. BISG is a unique group in publishing because it works with all segments of the publishing industry. And the other wonderful thing about BISG is that it runs on committees, and the Rights Committee is one of 5 main committees for the group. The mission is to lead the industry in best practices, research, education, lots of events, and it is, again, about that whole spectrum. There's the 5 committees. If you go on, I think we see a little bit more about the Rights Committee itself. We meet monthly. Starting in 2025, it'll be on Mondays at 11. The schedule's just about to come out. Notice how I say we'll meet on Mondays, but our first meeting's on a Tuesday. That's due to American holiday. In the committee itself, which is comprised of rights people from publishers, literary agents, publishing system vendors, it has international participation. We try to make sure we're paying attention to all the problems globally that rights people and rights practitioners may have. I would say problems and successes. And we work on pretty important and interesting projects together to try and lift all the boats and solve some of the problems. You'll see a few things that we're doing in the future. You'll hear more about those. The first one of the big projects that we've been working on for quite a while is this royalty statement standards project. We talked about it in Frankfurt with a group of international publishing people, and we're continuing to push this out. It's still got a little bit of work to do. So we welcome people who want to come and talk with us about this specific issue, which is to say the receipt of royalties from translation rights publishers, and in fact, the sending of royalties when we are the translating publisher is very complex. There have not been industry-wide standards. Receiving those reports can be tricky because they're often incomplete. And all of us want to spend more time talking about books, making more deals, and the amount of time we end up spending on questions related to royalty calculations can be very, very much slow down the rest of our business. It's extremely important, of course, because all of this money does in the end get shared with authors, highly profitable money in a publishing company. So we are working to help set a standard so that people can do this more efficiently. So we'd welcome you to come along and be a part of that working group. And then I think the next slide is a little bit about our in-person meeting. We have a tradition of an annual meeting that was, of course, interrupted some by the pandemic. But last year in January, we had a very lively in-person meeting. We'll do it again. We are working now on an interesting agenda. And those of you who have ideas of what it would be interesting to hear about at that meeting, I welcome you to let me know or let Brian or Brooke know at BISG. It's a wonderful time. We all have a chance to sort of glimpse each other in the hallways of book fairs, but really hanging out with rights people is wonderful. So I encourage you all to put that on your calendar and watch for more news about what the event will be. And there's where you can find us. We'll put that up at the end.
Right.
But now, go ahead, Brian.
I was going to say, we'll put that back up at the end so that people can follow up with Rachel, Camilla, and you if needed. but I'd like
Right.
to turn it over to you and to introduce both Rachel and Camilla and kick us off.
Great. So we're here today to talk about the role of book scouts, specifically in children's publishing. And I was really happy to be able to get two great experts with a lot of experience to come and talk about what they do and how they do it. And I know from speaking to them how much they enjoy what they do. Rachel Hecht runs her own business based here on the East Coast and has been in the scouting business for a long time. She's worked in foreign rights and actually lived in London as well as being here in the States. Camilla also has lived in the US and worked in rights in publishing companies and now is back in the UK scouting. And I'll let them tell you a little more about their clients and their businesses. Camilla works for Sylvie Zanier and Company. What's it called? Sylvie Zanier Literary Scouting. Is that what it's called?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Yeah. So why don't you start and just tell us a little bit about what you specifically do within Sylvie's business, but also the overall look of that scouting agency.
Sure. So I think Sylvie set it up, I don't know, a while ago. She's based in Oxford. I'm actually based in London. And we scout for adult and kids publishers. So Sylvie does the adult side, scouting fiction and nonfiction. I scout YA and children. So that's sort of my part of the business. And we, I suppose, what do we do day to day? We are hired by the international publisher. And we are looking for books that might fit their list. So I think we'll go into more detail about what that day-to-day means. But basically, we are receiving manuscripts, it's probably too much detail, pre-publication, and we are recommending them to our clients. So my key markets are Germany, France, and Italy, and Finland. And Sylvie has the same and some more on the adult side. And we are constantly in touch, emailing every day, sending reports, keeping them up to date with trends. And yeah, basically, I suppose in a nutshell, and Rachel will speak more about this, we are kind of like a matchmaker between the international publisher and the book. So we're not agents, we're not literary agents. We are there to help our international publisher. We're working for them to find the best book. They want a book on, whatever fantasy book. And we have lots of those sent to us and we say, this could be for you. So as you said, I briefly just to say, I worked in rights for many years. So I've been on that side as Rachel has. So I've been sort of immersed in that international side of publishing for my whole career. I've always done that. And I really love connecting with editors. So it's a lot of fun.
Great. Rachel, tell us about your business.
Absolutely. So, US based, I work with across 10 different territories with international publishers, as well as for film and TV. Like Camilla, I've always been immersed in the international side of the business and the rights scene. So yeah, and like Camilla, I think the important distinction for a book scout, it's kind of a mysterious side of the industry. There are not very many of us. My scouting agency is the first and only scouting agency in the US that is exclusively focused on children's and young adult. And we really are there to advise, guide, and source materials for our clients. We are not literary agents. We do not deal directly with authors. Neither are we, rights sellers. Really, we are paid for our advice and our opinion and our experience in the industry to be able to identify that exact right book at the exact right time and get it into the hands of the client who is going to be able to, suit it and publish it best. So really, we're constantly talking, constantly reading, and seeking for that best match.
Yep. You said you have 10 clients, right? And that's a range from some of the larger publishing, more mature publishing territories and some of the smaller territories, right?
That's it, exactly. So large, Brazil, France, Germany, to Hungary, Israel, and everything in between. And across that range, I also work with publishers of all different shapes and sizes, from, you know, large international conglomerates to smaller family-owned companies that have been around for decades. So it's a real mixed bag, which keeps things pretty lively and interesting.
Yeah. So I know from recently updating the Publishing Trends Scouts
Thank you.
directory, which everyone can find on Publishing Trends. Just Google up who's scouting whom, and you'll find a couple directories of US and UK Scouts. I know from looking at that it is not necessarily only the biggest territories that have Scouts, which I had to ponder a bit, but you all answered me the other day in our pre-meeting quite quickly, that it really has to do with the competitive nature of the territory. So even if it's a smaller territory, but a publisher is very interested in being sure that she sees the top titles for translation, then a scout is super useful for making sure that the timing, the scheduling, that look into the future. I think that's probably one of the coolest things about what you guys do. You have a nose for what's going to be a bestseller, what's going to be new. I mean, new and important.
And having a client that, you know, might particularly need, you have a need of a particular title, Camilla mentioned fantasy, romantasy, or whatever it might be, but being able to pluck that exact right one out of the pile at the exact right time. And also, I think another function of our role is, especially perhaps in some of the smaller territories, is making sure that our clients are on the radar of the right sellers, and that when they're considering submissions or they're considering offers, they really have from us the full context and information about these publishers, their publishing profile, the list they're putting together, so that hopefully, you know, that the right seller can have the best and current information as they make their decision through the offer process.
And just to add to that, we are like a champion of those publishers. We are representing them here. We are meeting literary agents and, you know, publishers, editors, rights teams to say, this is what they're looking for, you know, to really help ease that process. You say, we're kind of like an extension of a rights team in some ways, that we are, you know, on hand to help them. And if we feel that a book is really right for them, we want obviously our publisher, and it is competitor, our publisher, to go for it. And I think, as Rachel said, timing is key, as you said, Kris, spotting that trend, getting it, the early manuscripts. So we get manuscripts very early. We get them, you know, way pre-pub, before they've maybe gone out, you know, widely. And it's kind of getting that in the hands of the right editor. And editor to editor is also important, I think. But yeah, and large or small markets, you know, they can benefit hugely from this. So yeah.
Yeah, I think that trend, Lorraine, by the way, Lorraine, thank you. Lorraine Shanley of Publishing Trends has put in the link to the scouting directory. So everybody go there and check that out. And of course, part of it was just updated yesterday, this morning. So there's, you know, it's up to the minute. I think the plan is to keep that up to date. It had not been updated for about 3 years. And the world of scouting does change as the world of publishing changes. You know, well, we all know why publishing changes. Let's leave it at that. But we will be updating. So if anyone knows of new information that needs to be included, the best thing to do is email to Publishing Trends. I also wanted to flag a great article that appeared last summer in another important part of our business, publishers marketplace, about scouts and how they work. And one of the interesting factoids in that article that I enjoyed very much and reflects my experience in publishing over the years is that a particular scout mentions that he used to receive something like a couple hundred manuscripts a month or a year, and it was in the thousands now. So I think it's really important to emphasize that's a big part of what you're doing, is sifting through, you know, every agent with a list of titles and every publishing company with a list of titles is interested in trying to get those books out into the world. And I know from a rights seller point of view, it's so helpful to have that insight from you about things that I wouldn't necessarily see or know. what they're doing in their local marketplaces, you know, how their advertising or marketing works, what they've done with other authors, how they're building categories. But do you find that you're working pretty specifically with an editor on your client side, or I suppose it could be a range of editors in certain houses?
For me, it depends on the client, and Camilla, I'm sure it's similar for you.
Yeah, and you're writing reports. I mean, you're having phone calls, you're writing reports, you're telling them. I know for some scouts that report can be a very large pre-book fair full report of titles. I know for each of you, I think it's a little bit different. I mean, that you do that, but you also do a lot of work during the year, yeah?
Yeah, so we do weekly reports, we are keeping them up to date, as you said, to a specific editor, but within, a bigger publishing company, you're going to have an editor for, every fiction, non-fiction, this age, that age. So you are really targeting them and making sure it goes, that the agent here is putting it in the right hands. So that's really important. And yeah, I think, that editor contact is really important. So yeah, so we are.
Yeah, and I was just to jump off of that a little bit. That editor to editor contact is key, and I think also cultivating that relationship, and it's cultivated through your reads and through those reports we send out on sometimes a daily basis. Sometimes heading into the fairs, it's an absolute frenzy. But so that that your clients really know, understand, and can trust your taste on a particular read. So we know in many cases we're the first set of eyes before it goes through to a broader committee or through to an editor. So it's it's a joy for me to have developed those relationships over the course of many years. And yeah, in terms of the reporting, the daily book reports, the weekly larger memos, and then pre-fair, we do a pretty comprehensive document that covers the highlights to the best of our abilities of all the attending publishers and agents from the US. And trying to pluck out those key highlights that we think are going to be of the biggest appeal and flag them accordingly.
Right.
And I do the same with the UK. So on Australia, we scout UK and Australia, and pre-fair, we do a really big document to kind of highlight hot title lists, etc. But actually, just going back to your point, Kris, about the scout that mentioned the thousands of manuscripts that come in. I mean, I scout those two markets predominantly, but you have to kind of know what's going on in the rest of the world. So, I might have manuscripts from France, from Italy, from other countries, so you have to be aware what's going on. And obviously the US, which is huge and very dominant and, very appealing for publishers. I mean, so you're sort of have to be, you need to be sort of eyes open on the whole marketplace, I suppose.
Everywhere all at once.
Right. There was a good movie about that. Do you want to talk about specific types of titles that are really successful for you now, or that are really important to your publishers? Who's going to say the R word first?
Yes, still, I don't know. To those of you listening, have you heard of the genre romantasy? Still the name of the game, immersed in it more than ever this Frankfurt. Really a lot of focus and funds being placed in this zone still. Trying to chase that explosive lightning in a bottle. Everybody in the territory is reading it kind of title. So definitely that's still sucking up a lot of focus. Romantasy, and then crossover based titles, whether it's romance or fantasy or romantasy. Camilla, please chime in from your seat.
Yeah, I mean, I can only echo what Rachel's saying. We've had this for over a year now. It's been sort of like really, most submissions have been YA crossover, and we have this rather blurry thing where, crossover adult, it's a little confusing. And so again, we're helping our publishers see, is this more for a crossover adult market? Is it YA? What is the voice like? So you're really kind of trying to dig deep in there. But those submissions keep coming, and there is still appetite, although, it seems like many publishers have bought their romantasies and maybe 3 books, so it'll be interesting to see come next year with London Book Fair and Bologna where we're at, and what else might emerge as a trend. But that's definitely been the hottest trend without a doubt this year and last year, I suppose. And they're hitting the New York Times list. And there are a variety of authors, some self-published. There's been I thought I mentioned Lauren Roberts' Powerless, which has been a huge hit. UK, US, hit the bestseller list. I mean, I think the sales have been incredible, but also internationally has hit those bestseller lists. And that's really amazing and fascinating to see that it really, that book, which was kind of one of the early, and it was sort of ahead of the curve in some ways and sort of propelled the trend, and is really doing well. And it's got sort of Hunger Games roots to it, I suppose. So it's not brand new by any means, but it's been a massive hit here and elsewhere, and that's kind of driving the market at the moment.
And that's something like 30 languages, right? It's up to a very high number of translation deals, which is fantastic. And the other, I wanted to just flag the timing issue. Maybe I should take a step back for a minute just to say, this is selling translation rights, licensing translation rights, and it begins with a rights holder in these cases in an English language territory, right? So an English language book is coming, an agent or a publishing company rights person is going to be licensing it out. They often have sub-agents or co-agents in territory. So if I'm trying to sell in France, I might have a co-agent in Paris. And that co-agent represents my books from wherever I am, agency or publisher, and a lot of other English language books from a lot of other people. So that co-agent has a huge volume of submissions and things to work on. And the scout comes really as that matchmaker kind of in between, working for the publisher in the territory. The thing I wanted to say that just to sort of lay out for people who maybe don't know the whole translation story, but it's the timing that's really important. So you mentioned there's a need to see ahead what might be a bestseller, but for these titles that come in a series, and for the normal lag that happens with translation publishing, things can get a little tricky, right? If I published this book in 23 over here in English, and it's going to come in Germany, how fast can they get it? How quickly can they get it out, right? That's a concern, because there's going to be another book in a year. And if they're just doing the first book when the second book is here, then will the trend hold, and all those kinds of considerations, right? Yeah, I'm sure you're advising on that.
I think it's an important thing to consider, especially as the trend cycling seems to be accelerating in a faster way than I've certainly ever experienced before. And I think partially too, that speaks to a little bit maybe of the fatigue and the caution that some of the editors are articulating. We might not be seeing that necessarily, there might not be the hesitation on the actual deal making, but there's certainly a conversation going on about, have we acquired enough? And the timing is absolutely important to keep in mind. If the smash hit is happening now and it's exploding on Book Talk, by the time your translated edition comes out in 2026 or 2025, and then your book 2, and you've acquired a trilogy or 4 books or 6 books in some of these cases, is the momentum still going to be there by the time, it's always a difficult task, I think, to maintain enthusiasm momentum throughout the course of publishing an entire series. And will the market and the trends, that appetite still be in place to support and follow up that publication?
Yeah.
And it is, I mean, just to add, it is important for the German, Swedish, Norwegian publisher to publish simultaneously or as close as possible, as you're saying, Kris, for that very reason, so they don't lag behind. And also because of export, English language sales can impact dramatically the German edition on the foreign edition. And I think that's something that when you are advising and talking to a publisher about should they commit to this series, that's absolutely part of the whole conversation, because that's a big factor. Can they get the translation in time to get it out for publication at the same time? And work with the rights team and the agent to do that.
And I think that export edition question is really changing the name of the game, especially in some of the Northern European territories. And certainly in Germany, we're seeing it, we saw it happen in Holland, and it's certainly happening in Germany, and Scandinavia as well. And that just to sort of broadly speak about it, in case you're not an absolute rights nerd like some of us are, but when this is an export edition is when the US or UK publisher is distributing copies of their title into European or other international markets. It's often paperback, it's much cheaper. And for the social media aspect of it, you know, will often most times carry that same cover image and that cover design as well, which can be all important in the feeds and reels and streams of it all. But I think the impact of the English language export edition cannot be understated at this point in time.
Yeah, I mean, we had a Willem talk to us at one point about this in Holland and show some examples, or talk to us about some examples of titles that came in English. The English language books aren't subject to the same restrictions in terms of price. The Dutch edition is going to be more expensive. It's going to be later. Dutch young people especially are now reading in English. There were interesting publishing programs, and I don't know how much of this has happened in YA, where a book, I think it was a Colleen Hoover actually, was published with an English language title, but Dutch inside, with the matching covers, obviously, to try and sort of get on top of that phenomenon where people would go buy it and read it in English if it was available, because it was happening now, you know, trying to, and seeing that start to spread, you know, through Scandinavia and, you know, sort of problematically into Germany, which has always been such a strong rights territory. So yes, it does seem that many rights holders are aware of this as well and are trying to facilitate simultaneous publication, right? But it's rare for an original first-time publisher to hold their pub date so somebody can catch up in another territory. Yeah. But
it's a conversation in-house with the publishers, definitely. That is. But you mentioned social media, Rachel, and of course, you know, the Dutch teens, etc., Germans are seeing this book on BookTok and TikTok. And I mean, just to sideways into that has been a game changer when it comes to YA books. And part of the reason, I suppose, around to see in teen YA books, crossover books are so huge thanks to TikTok. I mean, that's been a massive reason that we've seen such a kind of spike in sales in that side of the market. So
yeah, it's a global world. There's no getting away from it. And let's just do a sort of day in the life, year in the life of a scout. I think you have some very specific deadlines and markers out there that generally revolve around the book fair. So you want to talk about, maybe Camilla, start with you're already in Europe, kinda. We're not supposed to say that anymore. Sorry. And so you attend maybe a few more book fairs than those of us coming over from the States do. But do you want to sort of say how your year lays out and what are you working on now? It's almost December.
Yes, so I haven't started Bologna or London scheduling yet, but that's certainly on our radar. You know, Sylvie and I were talking about it this week. December is often the time. So London Book Fair. So yeah, just to go back to your question. So these book fairs really shape our year. So we have London is normally March, April, not a firm date, the same date every year. Bologna is the same. They sort of circle around each other. And then Frankfurt, which is always mid-October. So those really inform our year, because that's when publishers and agents are sending out the kind of hot new submissions. So ahead of London Book Fair, which will be mid-March next year, you will have agents sending out their hot new titles, etc., and into Bologna. So that's the really kind of busy time of the year. So, you know, at the moment, we're not winding down, but you've still got some submissions coming out. Prior to the book fairs, you have a lot. So you are obviously sending those through to your editors, your international editors, and we are meeting agents and rights teams to find out what is their hot book for the book fair. What is, you know, what's your sort of new big thing? So we get that information and obviously inform our publishers. And obviously we then go to the book fair, well, obviously, but we do. And that is a great opportunity to meet with our international editors, get together, you know, maybe meet publishers. I see Australians there, for example. I can't see them in person, obviously, day to day. And, you know, you do, I mean, to go into detail, and Rachel, you can take over this, you know, literally you have every half an hour meetings. There's a lot of meetings happening in these book fairs. Literally people will, so we help our editors, we help them schedule, to
Yes.
see the right people. So we help them with that. And they are seeing a different publisher every half an hour, every hour. So it's a packed day of seeing maybe for a children's editor, a YA, you're talking about YA, middle grade, all picture books, nonfiction. So you might be talking about across all those different categories in children's books. So yeah, so I'm going to hand over to Rachel now, but basically those book fairs inform our year, and they're and the schedules within publishing houses they match that. So the books are kind of ready in time for the agents and rights teams to take them to the book fair.
That spring, summer, fall, winter kind of fits in. But in the fall, you're talking about the spring, and in the spring, you're talking about the fall.
You're talking about
to get ahead, or even a year out in some cases.
Exactly, they are not published. I mean, some might be, because if it's a beautiful illustrated book, you want to show that off at the book fair, obviously, so they can see the finished copy. But generally, you're way in advance.
It's so glamorous, this international travel and meeting people from all over the world. And I just want to go back a step, and you'll appreciate it. I think, as Rachel said, we're such nerds, that setting up of a schedule at a book fair is like a massive game of Jenga. You pull one out and it could all topple down. But you do that for your whole group of clients. I know that you all scouts participate in sort of helping them to make sure they're getting in front of the people they need to see, who need to know them. And that can be, in some ways, time consuming, but so important, and takes a kind of real touch. It's not sort of, go on my calendar and find a slot, the robot will do it for you, because you really need to put things in an order where it makes sense for them to be seeing big markets first, or important books first, or whatever. Rachel, I don't know if you want to talk about how your year, you go to London and Bologna, is that right? Or
usually it depends on the lineup. It depends on the timing and the lineup, and how, this, to be frank, the 2025 schedule is not ideal for me. To be out of the office for a prolonged amount of time.
There's too much time in between, right?
It's too much. I can't really make the case to stay over. So I probably will give London a pass this year, or we'll see. But I do like to go to London when the timing lines up. But absolutely, the book fairs are the big sort of tent poles of the year, and it's a sort of a wash of preparation heading into those events. The rights teams are getting their materials ready. Agents are selling new projects actively out in the US and UK, and of course other major territories. But it really is a real sprint of preparation for those moments, and then the sort of tapering off of after your marathon, heading into make the follow-ups and making sure that materials that new materials that you heard about at the fair have come through, or reaching the right clients who are being evaluated in a timely way. Again, to just, facilitate and make those connections happen. And I think that's a great point too about the scheduling. It's very, very time consuming, but there is a strategy and an art to it. And, trying to get maybe one of your guys from a smaller territory in with a big so-and-so, not at a 5 p.m. Saturday appointment when everybody's too exhausted to really even be articulate anymore.
Yes.
Trying to have, finesse that and finagle it in a way. And then, really truly in the day-to-day, because I sit in the US and the bulk of my client list is in the UK and Europe, my mornings are really informed by trying to catch my people in the office, before they head out for their evening, so I can pass along, last night I was reading this and I think you definitely want to take a look tonight, or definitely want to take a look before the weekend. So that kind of, just international time clock scheduling as well definitely impacts me from where I sit here on these.
Right. That is one of the wonderful things about book fairs, is that we all get in the same time zone, much as we love a Zoom. And it's really lovely to not be waiting for an airmail letter to come with the contract in it, It's still so much nicer when we're all in one time zone and having, no matter how jet lagged we might be, having a conversation
there's
together.
that energy too. I definitely feel from, that chance, that biannual chance to get together with some clients that I might only see in the spring and then the fall. I think that's something as a scout I really it really fills me up, and it really gives me a lot of energy and a lot of there's a lot of passion there. So definitely, and you can kind of feel it in the rooms and in the halls, that buzz, that chatter, you know. I think there's nothing better than gathering in a convention hall with 300,000 people from around the world who are just as enthusiastic about books and you know, helping books travel as I am. I love it.
Same. I know that good feeling. Are there obvious, maybe to you, but not to us, cultural differences that mean that certain kinds of books don't travel? Again, in that article from Pub Lunch, you know, there was much talk of the American political books not being of great interest, let's say, for translation, however big they might be here. But children's world, I don't know. I used to get into hilarious conversations with people who would tell me, in my country, animals don't wear clothing. When I was selling picture books, you know, they didn't want the little jacket on their bunny.
I think there's always little anecdotes and little things to take away that are really great. I mean, considering the political aspects of it, you know, for example, my Hungarian publisher, we have a real difficult time due to the local government restrictions on LGBTQ topics in teen literature. And those titles, if they are placed in bookstores within a certain range of a church or a school or a municipal building, they must be, you know, covered in black and put behind the counter. So those are real, you know, hard walls we come up against when it comes to discussing, you know, titles that we're encountering here in the US, where obviously, thankfully, there aren't those kinds of restrictions. But Camilla, do you have anything that's more lighthearted to share?
I mean, I think the animals in clothes has definitely come up. I mean, as a rights seller, we heard that, you know, and, you know, I get it in some ways, but that was an issue. Other than that, I mean, I think this sort of swathe of romanticy has perhaps made it less, you know, within that trend, you know, everybody wants the same book, really. They go after the same thing. So I think it's maybe in the younger end, you know, sort of, you know, and you're just saying, unfortunately, we don't have so much banning of books, but in other markets, you know, there are books that just, you know, are hard. I mean, I know, you know, when I used to sell to China, some subjects are not going to be able to be out there, and that's, you know, that can be difficult. Certainly LGBTQ books are, you know, are hopefully making the way into every market, but sometimes there's a little bit of resistance from the booksellers. So I think, you know, I'd say in some ways less than there was perhaps some years ago. I think it's a little easier for whatever market, but I mean, when you have different political situations, then that can obviously raise issues.
Right. Do you want to talk a little bit about, for people now that everyone's completely convinced that scouting's the best job ever, if there are people here who are interested in breaking into scouting, what do you think is the best? Well, let's first say, Rachel, how many people in your company, how many people do you work with?
You have myself and a full-time assistant and some really trusted outside readers to help us manage the flow of things.
Right. And at Sylvie Zanier, how many people are there? And
me and Sylvie, and then we have she has a reader, usually more than, you know, because the adult side is a whole other thing, you know, there's a load more submissions, so I'm the only person on the side, and that we work it's closest together.
So there are larger agencies and there are smaller agencies even than we have here. But for those who are interested in coming into scouting, what do you see as the best characteristics, or what's a good pathway? What should they study?
I think a curiosity and avariciousness, shall we say, about books and reading, and being really omnivorous and outgoing in that reading, and engaging with the current titles on the bestsellers list, and engaging with those best of, you know, New York Times or best of the New York Public Library, and having a real interest in current marketplace trends and appetites. I think that's something I always look for, not just in terms of like recent grads, you know, what did you read on your senior thesis? It's lovely, but it's not exactly relevant for the day-to-day in trade children's publishing.
Yeah.
And you know, having a language definitely benefits. It's not an absolute must, but if you are a language graduate, that will help you enormously. In some, certainly in the UK, and some of the kind of colour illustrated publishers, they do love that. Their rights teams travel a lot. You know, you need to get in front of the international publishers with material. So I think that can be a plus. Certainly no reason, if you don't have a language, people don't mind, that's absolutely fine, but it's just can be a great job for, you know, someone interested in that. And then you've got that backdrop, as Rachel was saying, about being interested in the whole political, you know, the whole economy and everything in that market. But certainly reading around everything. I mean, you can check out the kind of PW in the US. There are journals that you can look at. Bookseller is the kind of key UK one. Publishing Perspectives. I mean, there's all sorts of, you know, and social media, of course, you know, you'll find loads of authors there and what people are recommending, and, you know, and the bestseller list.
I think you both mentioned that you read the publishing trades from the territories where your publishers are as well. So when you can, if you're reading in German or in French, if you're reading or, you know, there's quite a lot we can learn from those, even if we're not super fluent. A bestseller list is pretty easy to figure out. If it says the author's name, we know what's best-selling in those territories. So you are reading broadly, I think, also and that knowing a language is more than just knowing a language, right? It's having the cultural sensitivity or the awareness of what that culture's like. One thing we haven't mentioned, which is so important in the US, well, in some aspects of children's publishing, is the education system and the books that get sold into schools or get taught in schools or are things teachers work with at all levels throughout the many grades. And I think that can be very different from country to country as well, right? The education systems are different. I've had people tell me, your book is very nice and it's an interesting story about this friendship, but they're in the classroom all the time. And our classrooms just don't look like that, Kris. They're not desks in a row facing a chalkboard. Thank you very much. So, you know, you have to kind of think about what's different.
And reading, you know, when different countries learn to read at different stages. So, I mean, the UK, we seem to be, you know, kids go to primary school, they start at 4, it's rising 5. And so your first readers are going to be different from what a German publisher might need for children at schools there. So I think that's a very good point. You know, different expectations. And, you know, for sort of readers 7+, 8+, what does that mean? It's got to be, you know, if you're a little bit older and learning to read, needs a really decent, meaty story. So that can definitely bring up some kind of more interesting, you know, diverse taste basically in that area.
And I think that's why sort of that younger section of the market can be a little tricky, can be a little slippery. And Camilla, I think that's it exactly. It's, you know, different countries learning to read at different points in time. And also, to touch back earlier, you know, some countries prefer or, you know, need to have really, you know, highly illustrated chapter books or younger fiction, and others prefer absolutely not. I had the chance to attend the Lillehammer Festival a couple summers ago, and was delighted to be informed that there is sort of no holds barred in terms of, you know, rudeness on the page or different topics in younger literature, that there was anything kind of good. So it was, you know, from the depths of the book banning that's happening here in the US, it was really a delight to hear.
Yeah, that's very nice. All those wonderful children's books that we won't name, that have some of which have been quite successful in the US, coming over, say, from Japan. The other piece of that, so the education piece, I don't know, we could go on forever. Do we need to go to some questions, Brian? Should we make sure we take time for that?
We do have some questions, but maybe we can do those. And then if we have a few minutes, then you want to go back to your prepared work.
Sure.
We can do that. So several of the questions that have been posed actually have been answered in the course of the conversation today. Linda was asking early on, are there any categories you don't scout with? I mean, there's already a framework that you're doing children's and YA, but are there parts of children's and YA that you just step aside from?
I mean, if your publisher is not doing reference, you might not be looking at children's reference, right?
Right. I mean, I tend to scout, not for all my publishers, but some of those who have picture book lists and non-fiction lists. So I do scout across the board, actually, for all ages. So that it depends on the client's needs. I mean, you know, which editor you're scouting for.
And same for
Right.
me. Same for me. There's sort of not, you know, perhaps reference or thing, but I'm definitely more trade focused. But it's 0 to 18 plus now for me. So fiction and nonfiction.
Oh, that is something I wanted to say about the plus plus. So on the younger end, there's this shift in when children are learning to read and what level they're at what age. And then there's this new adult category, which is not so new. So I don't know why I'm bringing it up anyway, but I am. That there might be books that are published as adult books, even in the US, because of a variety of historical puritanical reasons, and that work perfectly well as young adults in translation on some children's lists effectively, right? So you have had to expand into that 18 plus piece over there.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, interesting. Okay, other questions, Brian?
Or a second question was from Kelly. Just are there things, specific data, trends, reporting that you seek out to guide your work as a scout? Are you trying to understand a market? Are you trying to understand trends across markets, et cetera?
Absolutely. For me, we analyze Nielsen with a fine-tooth comb every week to really just dive into that data and see, are there titles that are jumping up percentage-wise, percentage increases, percentage decreases? So that's just one of the tools. Camilla, I'm sure you are.
Same thing, basically. You're looking at, and the bookseller is very, having those sort of the information you get from those journals or the daily, sort of email you get, that's hugely helpful. There are conferences you can go to. I mean, last year I went to the Children's Conference, which was a sort of UK based, but had talks around the trends and the business that had been going on that year and looking to the future. There's been a big survey recently about how reading for pleasure for kids is way down in the UK. So publishers are coming up with initiatives to really address that, because obviously that if kids don't want to read, then we have a real problem. So yeah, there's lots of data out there we can look at. I can't think of any specific beyond Nielsen. But you just have to read around a lot, which is interesting, and yeah, informs you pretty well,
and can lead you on any variety of other rabbit holes that will continue to inform and provide. So
yeah.
And Rachel, when you say Nielsen, you're thinking the BookScan product?
Sorry, yes, yeah, my apologies.
Yeah, it is still Nielsen in the UK, but it's Circana here in the US.
That's right. Thanks for that.
It's a question more generally about what a career trajectory for someone who wants to be a book scout. I mean, what skills, attributes, or work experience would you look for in trying to hire somebody?
I think any background or interest in foreign rights, international rights is always helpful, always applicable, just because we sit betwixt and between and sort of advising our clients and liaising with the rights departments. That's something that's always stands out to me.
Yeah, I mean, we're both from rights backgrounds, but any experience in a publishing house or an agency or a scouting, anything, I think, is just so you get the idea and the sense of the whole sort of process, because it's a long one and scouting is just one part of it. Although being a scout, and what I've loved having done over 20 years of rights selling, is you get a great sense of the whole industry, what those individual parts and how they all come together. And that's been a real joy. And I've really loved that. So, I've found, I've learned a lot of new stuff. But I think for anyone starting out, they could literally try and get the work experience, internship, anything in publishing. So you just get in there, find out what people are doing and ask loads of questions, contact people, wherever, LinkedIn or wherever. I think all that is useful. People in publishing are generally pretty lovely and great and happy to help.
Yeah, informational interviews, all of that, I think.
Anything else?
And it sounds like a curiosity about the market that you want to support plays a big role too. We have from Barbara a question. How early would a scout want to see a manuscript from a publisher, and at what stage? Should it be before it's copy edited? How quickly do you want to get involved?
Very quickly. We want to get,
Acquisition.
we want to see it out the door, basically. Pre-acquisition, we want to see the agent sending it out. And not every agent feels comfortable doing this, which depends on the author. case by case, but from a scout's perspective, and I think Rachel would agree, we want to see it as soon as we can, knowing it's going to have, you know, it's a debut author, it's going to have lots of work done to it, and, you know, it's going to change, but you get the sense of what that, you know, what that writing is. And I think that's really important, and how we can serve our publishers better.
And I think that's also part of the life of the scout. I love to have that early glimpse as possible, with the knowledge that, yes, it could change. Yes, it could, depending on who picks it up in the US and their editorial plans for it. And that's the other, talk about bird's eye sort of, silver lining of the job, is you might encounter a text on submission, you might encounter it, when it's being officially submitted by a rights department, or again, when it hits the New York Times list, or again, when it hits a best of list, and having the opportunity to take, a taste of a title at all of those stages throughout its life, and being able to recommend sort of accordingly. Some clients might not be ready to consider a material until it's in its best and final shape, and sort of that's on us to sort of drive and make sure the flow rides accordingly.
Right.
I'm going to let me chip in one more thing here, which we didn't explicitly say, but I want to say, which is, you're not assisting in the actual offers, in the negotiating, in the contracts. I'm sure you get asked questions, and, could you get a cover file? Could you have the authors blah, blah, blah sent over? But you're not officially involved in the deal. It's the making the match, getting the material, right?
Yes, right. Absolutely are there to facilitate and advise and sort of handhold throughout an auction process. And, if we can pick up any additional hints or insights, but no, we are not doing the deals, negotiations, or the back end, always around to facilitate.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the other point to add to that is that, the relationship between that international editor who's bidding within an auction with the rights person or agent, they need that relationship, and that's really important to maintain that. We are there to help from both sides. We are matchmaking, coordinating, but they need to have that relationship. It's really important.
Right. That's good. Yeah.
Anna's asking if is most of your work centered on exporting English language books to other languages, or do you find international books that you bring to an English language audience?
For me, the primary focus of my job is based in the US, reporting on US, Canadian, Australian English language titles going out. It's a bonus, it's a pleasure, it's a joy when I encounter international titles that I can evaluate and recommend the other way around. But my primary focus is English language titles out to translation.
And it's the same for me. It's the UK, Australia, Canada, the odd US, but predominantly it is English language. And as Rachel says, unless something, it seems to be doing really well in a market that we don't normally scout for, fantastic. You get to recommend something. And the books from our clients, their books, they might even help their rights teams and say, oh, you haven't sold this book, and you can recommend it to one of your other clients. So there's a nice synergy in that too.
And also to add that there are European and other, internationally based scouts that work in Italy to advise and recommend on Italian literature going out, and all around the world in that way. So we're everywhere.
In a related sense, and I think you gave an answer in part to this in the earlier conversation, Hannah's asking how important are multi-language skills and cultural competence in doing a scout's job well?
I'd say cultural competence and political awareness, and cultural, empathy is extremely important. Being able, fluency in another language is a great bonus. It's something that's really helpful and useful to have, but it's, for better or worse, English is the language that the business is conducted in, and that manuscripts are reviewed in. So it's not an essential.
Yeah, and I would agree. It's not essential, but having that kind of sensitivity to the markets is more important, and aware what's going on.
Is there a difference between scouting for publishers versus scouting for agents in a given market?
No, it's the same. Scouting. Sorry, can you repeat the question?
Sure. So is there a difference between scouting for a publisher versus scouting for an agent in a specific market, if you have a co-agent or somebody similar?
So I just want to, this is this vocabulary thing that comes up around rights that it's really important to be precise on. There are rights going out into a publishing company, rights might be with an agent, they might be with a publisher in English, and they go out to a foreign language publishing company. And that German publishing company bought rights in. These two scouts work for foreign language publishers who are looking to buy rights into their companies. So they're scouting on behalf of their foreign language publishers, but they talk to agents and publishing rights departments and editors about books in English to tell their clients about. So if the question is there a difference between what you talk to a publishing rights person about in a company versus what you talk to an agent representing foreign rights about, that's a kind of question. I think your answer would be no. You're talking to whoever who's the rights holder, who's going to be licensing those rights to Germany or to Sweden or to France, right?
Exactly.
And it's an identical conversation.
Yeah, the identical conversation, be it a literary agent, primary agent who's representing the author, or be it the publisher who's bought those rights, but it's very much the same conversation. And the co-agent, maybe that's confusing. That is, someone, for example, one UK publishing company, Walker, for example, has a French sub-agent. So that French co-agent is helping them sell the books into France. But our conversations are with the rights holders.
Sometimes
and that
muddle it up and meet and talk with the sub-agent in a particular territory, especially if they represent a lot of big companies or they have a very close relationship with our clients, to just really broaden that community and broaden those lines of communication so that anybody feels comfortable at any point in the time to pick up the phone and and hop on it. But sorry if that muddles things up even more.
No, but that co-agent might actually be thinking of sending, the local Paris agent might be thinking of sending that book out to a whole lot of French publishers, but you want it to go to your French publisher first. And in fact, you probably sent it to your French publisher, and you want to make sure that that's registered and in there and in part of that deal. I love the mention of auctions, which is something that really does happen in translation rights around the biggest titles, and they can be extended over a period of time, or they can happen very quickly. I don't know if you smiled, Rachel, when I said it's extended, because sometimes they take quite a long time, right?
Sometimes they can take a very long time, and sometimes I've been privy to auctions that have lasted over a month, and really tried to handhold my client through that process. And whether it's because of something happening at the publishing house in the US, or perhaps there's back-to-back holidays internationally, and so it just rolls on from there. But you really do sometimes feel like a sort of a counselor or a therapist on some of these prolonged auctions. And then on the other hand, when you have go straight into a best bid situation, that's another kind of whiplash. So
right, yeah.
The original questioner clarified to say that they were looking for a sense of whether it's harder or different getting information for literary agents or if there's an in-house rights person, but I think you've answered that.
It's the same. It's they are assisting us, and we have usually great communication with both sides.
Great, thank you. One question we had was, do you have any sense of how publishers are reacting to middle grade books? The observation is that sales in the US have been sluggish, but is this something that's worldwide, or is it a part of a trend?
It's proving tough, and I think Rachel would agree. In Europe particularly is struggling with middle grade for lots of different reasons. We won't go into all of them here, but reading levels, all sorts of reasons. And so those submissions, because we've had tons of fantasy and YA rather, the teen books, the submissions have lessened. And we didn't see so many pre-Frankfurt. Hopefully for London Book Fair and Bologna next year we'll see more. But I think we're trying to calibrate, work out what are the middle grade books that are going to work in each market. And I think it's a sort of point where 5-6 years ago we had a lot of magical fantasy middle grade that is evolved. what do people want? Graphic novels are becoming, huge. That's serving the kind of younger ed and middle grades. So it's a very interesting question and a sort of complicated one because it's evolving as we speak. So, I mean, when I talk to my editors, they want something original, different. What does that mean? And agents and editors here are trying to work that out. So, there are still bestsellers, of course, in that part of the market. It's key. This is when kids learn to read. So they're readers of the future. So of course we need that age to be served. But it's interesting. So I think come next year, we'll see how it evolves. But yeah, Rachel, you probably want to add something.
Yeah, I think I agree with all of that. And we could almost have a whole mini webinar about the state of the middle grade market, the impact of the changing retailer mandates and demands here in the US, I think cannot be understated. And also, I think for the current middle grade readers, I think it's very important to be aware of and consider that pandemic learning loss for those kids who were learning how to read on Zoom or at home. I think is having a real impact in terms of reading levels and finding that material that is sophisticated enough and on a concept level that is not too babyish, but then in fact actually the words on the page, we cannot have these 400-page no, it's just not workable right now. So there's a lot of dynamics in play, and I'm hopeful and optimistic that we will see more in this category. We need it desperately, because who is going to be reading these romantasy trilogies in 5 years if we are not feeding and fostering our youngest readers? I feel so passionate.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So
And
it's all part of the romantasy pipeline.
Indeed. But just to go on the translation, I think one of the things, just if you have a book that's already very long, you then translate it into German, Finnish, French, you've got an even longer book. So I think this is something that I know agents and editors are feeding back to authors. It's just trying to match that this whole question. But yeah, we could definitely spend a lot of time talking about it.
Yeah.
If Kris, if I could borrow a couple of minutes, we have a couple of questions I'd love to pose. One is from Don asking if not part of the deal, how does a scout get paid?
We are retained. Oh, sorry, Rachel. So go ahead.
Go ahead.
We are paid by the international publisher. So remember, we work for them. So that's how we are basically like a extra team member, I suppose, for that publisher. But we are not being paid we are not on the payroll of the UK publishing house or the agent. We are retained by the international publisher.
Which means our opinion can be really free and valid. And, I have no financial investment in whether my client acquires or not. So I'm very free to give my true feelings and opinion and advise them accordingly.
And one last question that's kind of more philosophical. There's Paulina's observing that it sounds like there's a lot of decision making in terms of curating content and content moderation. Do you ever think about your work as exporting one culture into another, and perhaps in a negative way? Do you ever worry about your application of your biases?
I think it's definitely something to be aware of. And, I'm here in the US. I am investigating and promoting US literature abroad. I try to be, receptive and aware of international trends and literature coming through, but, for better or for worse, the function of my job is US outward. So Camilla, I don't know if you have any.
Yeah, I mean, I think, I'm the same, they are predominantly UK books that I'm promoting to our clients. As I said earlier, I try to kind of highlight their books. You would love to see them published and, translated in lots of other languages. But that is our kind of key role. But I'm very aware, my German publisher is publishing a lot more local literature. That's incredibly important. Of course, they want to champion their own authors. So you need to be aware of that. It's really important. So what does their list? Is it half translation books? Is it half local grown? So I think, yes, we are working on the UK, on the English language side, but you need to be aware and hope that you don't, create too many biases. But sensitive.
You know, what I know from the editors and the publishing companies that you would be working with is you are indeed their trusted advisor, but you're not a pinch point in some funnel. They have tremendous access from a lot of sources to bring in all kinds of content, and they tell you what they're interested in. So I would say there are many ways for a publishing company on the foreign translation side to be able to be thinking about what is important in my country and what am I interested in. And then let's overlay this with the fact that this is all about a commercial enterprise here. So they're meaning intentionally to publish books that will be successful in their marketplaces. And that drives a certain amount of choice as well, you know, in terms of what comes into the funnel, right? So they see TikTok just like we all do, and they know what kids are interested in. And so they're going to find those things.
And just to add, you know, as we were saying with the early years, that might be easier for them to do in their language. The authors can go into primary school and can to promote them. And they might say to me, actually, you know what, we need a book and it's easier to buy it in. You know, we had an idea like this, but didn't work. So, you know, they're aware of that. Some books they want to publish in the local, and they want to be local authors, and others they want to look beyond, because you know, there's a lot of romantasy, so they can pick and choose. So yeah, it depends, but it's an interesting dynamic, and we need to be aware of that.
Yeah, I think it's definitely a dynamic to be aware of, and also to be, you know, where as exciting and as fun and as passionate about this job as I am just one channel. And if I say I might not, you know, connect with a book, or, you know, it might reach them through another way. If I, you know, what I say doesn't go. It's just a voice in a room. And so there's many different channels and many different pathways to just add that onto there.
Yeah.
So true.
Thanks. Well, it's good to know that we're not just cogs in a global romantasy pipeline. So
try not to be.
So just bringing back the email addresses for both for us, Kris, Camilla, and Rachel, if you want to get in touch with them, follow up. Thank you very much, Kris, for organizing today's panel, and also for the work that you did with market partners and publishing trends to put together the New Scouts database. Really appreciate the time today. And Camilla, thank you for making it the end of your day, or hopefully the end of your day. We'll have a recording of this webinar put together and available next week. We have a holiday coming up in the US, so it might take us a day or two longer. Thank you, though.
Yeah.
Thanks everyone for being here. Thanks especially Rachel and Camilla.
Thanks for
and
the
BISG for the opportunity.
Yeah,
Bye.
thank you. Happy Thanksgiving to you all. Enjoy.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye. Bye.